Attention, women's health professionals. The next round of FAM is just around the corner. Classes start on February 27th. FAM is the perfect program for busy women's health professionals who want to offer fertility awareness charting support in their practices. FAM cuts out all the fluff and only focuses on what you need to know to serve your clients better. Each module, homework assignment, in-class training, and chart review session is there for a reason. Where will you be 9 months from now? With a FAM certification, you'll have a brand new skill set that will allow you to use the menstrual cycle as a diagnostic tool and vital sign in your practice. Your confidence in analyzing and interpreting menstrual cycle charts will be at a level you can't even imagine today. You'll have a brand new offering in your business that will allow you to reach more clients. This knowledge is truly life-changing. Transform your practice in 9 months. You won't regret it. Join us this February in FAM. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMLive to apply today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 507. Today, I'm sharing a brand new episode. I'm sharing my episode with Diane Ducarme, and we're talking all about migraines. And if this is a topic that interests you, I'm going to also make a point of including in the show notes page a number of episodes that we've previously released on the topic of migraines and also on the topic of boosting low progesterone. When migraines, especially when they're cyclical, when you're charting your cycles and you identify a connection between migraines and the menstrual cycle, there's often a connection to hormone imbalances as well. And so the general theme here is that by supporting optimal hormone health and balancing hormones, many women also notice a shift, an improvement in their overall experience of migraines. And I suppose another important point and takeaway from these migraine-themed episodes is that it's not this life sentence that you may have been told. It's actually possible to restore a normal life with either no migraines or a very limited experience of migraines over time once you implement these principles. So before we jump into today's episode, I'll share a little bit about Diane. Diane Ducarme is the founder and CEO of Nectar Health, a company that advocates for and adds years to the lives of those suffering from migraine disease. Diane has an MBA from Harvard Business School. She is a Fulbright Scholar and an Edmund Hillary Fellow. She has a master's in science, engineering, technology, and mathematics from Europe and studied traditional Chinese medicine in China. She's now with the Academy of Healing Nutrition. And fun fact, Diane speaks 7 languages, one of which is Mandarin. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. And I'm excited to be here with Diane Ducarme. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for having me.
You're welcome. I just have kind of like a fun fact before we get into everything, because in your bio, you speak 7 languages, one which is Mandarin. And I would love, like, I often wish that I could speak those, like, I don't know, if you want to share a little bit about that or a little bit about your background, because I find that to be fascinating. That's so cool.
Yeah, well, actually, I think when I was a kid, I was talking with my sister and we would have pretend languages. So they didn't mean anything. And I was always the godmother of her baby. And she was the godmother of my baby, which now is true. Aww. And we would speak fake languages. I'm born in Brussels. I'm Belgian of origin. My mother tongue's French. But in Brussels, you have so many different cultures that we were always exposed to, Dutch, but also English, German, Spanish, Italian with the European Commission. And I don't know, I think it just grows your brain with curiosity. I don't know. And then I went on learning English and I moved to London. And then when I moved to London and I was a teenager, before I wanted to become a doctor. And when I moved to London, I thought, oh my God, the world's so much bigger. I want to learn languages and I want to travel. And so I did that for a whole lot of time. And then I learned Mandarin and I discovered like amazing stuff I want to talk to you about. And I think my 8th language is actually migraines.
Interesting. Love that.
It's a language of the brain. I really mean it. I know you asked this question by coincidence, and I've never had the opportunity to say that on a podcast. Migraine is a language.
You gotta update the bio.
Yeah, I'm gonna identify you. You know what? I might. Good
Well,
idea.
that's such an interesting segue. I love that, by the way. Very, very fascinating. I thought it was definitely worth a mention. And so let us know a little bit about your background then, your professional background, and then what has inspired you or motivated you to really deepen into this area of migraines in women?
Yeah. So I was when I was a kid, I had a very weak health. So I was the type that has the bronchitis, the ear infection. The dad says, "Oh, to the mom, it's your genes," and he says, "No, it's your genes." Clearly, this child is problematic, and we're exhausted. And so I wanted to become a doctor, and I had a lot of empathy for people with bodily issues because my body would just always say no. I had the purple lips in the pool, and it's not a big deal, but you can't just, always tired, always needs to go to bed early. And then, as I was mentioning, I went to London, and I thought, wow, the world's so much bigger. If I'm a doctor, I'm just going to know Belgium, and that's so sad. There's so much to the world, so many diversity. I was just completely attracted by sort of being abroad, and so I studied business and I became a businesswoman traveling around the globe. And so I worked all over Europe. I worked in South Africa, which I loved. I worked in the Middle East. I worked in the US and I worked in China. Prior to that, I had a skiing accident where I lost half of my blood. I shrunk a kidney and I broke my femur and I had a ski in my forehead. So I was 17 and at university and my face was full of blood for about 2 months. And I gained, about 12 kilos, so 24 pounds. And my body was completely out of whack. So one leg was triple the other. And I think I had taken for granted a functioning body. And now I was really limping. And after that, and so I was not transfused. And after that, I really was struggling. So I would nap from 2 p.m. to 8 a.m. But I wouldn't, aside of my partner and now husband, like no one would really know, but I was like struggling with him like massively. And I studied an MBA, and when I did my MBA, which you'd think it would be the sharpest time of my life, I was just completely unsharp and unwell. And it's when I went to China that I one day I had on my to-do list to try traditional Chinese medicine. I was taking classes because I was curious, but I thought the teacher was average because the answer was always it depends. It was like, why do you have cold? It depends. And I was like, oh, do you know the answer? Yes or no? And so I thought, I'd either cross it off or I'd see. I went to see her when I was actually pregnant with my first daughter, and she and oh, you're gonna love that. The gynecologist told me, Diane, you're borderline on your blood sugar level. You're borderline gestational diabetes. And I cried because I said, look, I'm doing my best, but I'm exhausted. I'm like smashed, tired. And I don't do it on purpose. And so she says, you have to stop with the sugar and etc. And at the same time, coincidentally, I went to see that doctor. And she said, oh, you still don't have enough blood volume. So you're struggling in your pregnancy to recuperate that blood volume. And she fixed me in 3 weeks just with food. I was pregnant, but I was back to the energy that I had when I was 17. And especially after my pregnancy, my menstruation was for the first time regular. So it was for the first time, before it was a mess after that accident, but it was regular. So I thought, wow, what did she do? And my colleagues told me it's placebo. And I thought, oh, come on. Like, I can't decide not to have sugar cravings, and I can't decide that I'm going to have a regular cycle. I can't just decide these things. And so it fascinated me. And from there, it started a love for food as medicine and the body and starting to help others. And that's how things got started on the migraines.
That is really fascinating. I always find it just to be so interesting how people get into the work that they're doing because it's often a personal story, whether it's themselves or a family member or something like that. And you said in 3 weeks you were fixed with food. And your friends told you it was a placebo. I feel like this is just like this summarizes like the problems of like our medical system right there.
Yeah. And look, I mean, my colleagues, I adored my work. I was working at McKinsey & Company, and a lot of my colleagues are men. And I think it's really hard to relate to what happens in someone else's body. So it's like, don't gaslight me. Don't tell me I don't feel what I feel. I'm telling you, I feel it. But, I never insisted because I thought, it's also unfair. Like I'm feeling things that they don't feel, and I'm not going to start to talk about my menstruation at work. But I was like, it mind blew me. And then what happened is I started to take friends because, everyone talks to me always about their physical issues. Like even when I interview people for tech roles, they're like, oh, by the way, could you help me with this or that? And so my godfather died of a glioblastoma, which is a very violent form of cancer, very, very fast. And my sister approached me at that time and she said, look, I haven't told mom because I don't want to stress her out, but I have these massive migraines for the last 3 to 4 years. And I've done a couple of MRI and they haven't found anything yet, but like, it's very serious. And it makes me very anxious. I have 3 children and I don't know what it is. No one has an answer for me. And that day, I really heard her and I really took it seriously. And so I said, why don't we call Dr. Dang together and we'll help you out. And so she was the first one I helped out with migraines specifically. And she had no more migraines after 3 or 4 months, but I didn't think much of it for me. She had an imbalance. We solved the imbalance. She was no longer in pain. There was not much story.
Well, you say there was not much story, but something obviously had to change. She thought she had something in her brain that might prevent her from surviving to see her child. Like based on how you're telling the story, it sounded like she was really concerned that there could be something bigger, having multiple MRIs.
Yeah.
Now that, I feel like I'm dancing around here because I want to get into some other questions, but since you brought it up, tell us about what you did. Like, what did your sister change?
So basically she had a couple of imbalances. She had 3 children. Her body was completely smashed and exhausted. And she just had deficiencies at the kidney system level, at the liver system level. And we just fixed those. And it felt very natural. And it felt so natural that they just vanished. And, we discussed, like, is it gone? Oh, no, it's completely gone. Yeah, I haven't had one in a while. I think the day everything changed is when I did the same for the daughter of a neurologist. She was a good friend of mine. She said, oh, I've had this super confrontational conversation with my dad. I've had migraines for 7 years. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I didn't know you had migraines. She's like, yeah, I don't mention it often. And my dad told me I need to get medicated for life. And I'm like, oh, come on, you're 36, what, like 50 years of medication? She's like, yeah, including injections. I'm like, including injections? What do you mean? That sounds crazy. Surely no one does that. Turns out this is common practice. I didn't know. And I didn't know her father was a neurologist. So I told her, look, I looked into it for my sister. I'm pretty sure I can help you too. Give me a bit of time, busy with work. But over the weekend, I'll look into it. I'll open my books and I'm sure with Dr. Dang, we can figure something out. So I tell her what to eat, really simple things. And then 3 to 4 months later, she had no more migraines. And I'm like, well, hold on. Like, it's her dad telling her to get medicated. And her dad is a really good neurologist. Why? Why did he not tell her? And so I just got curious. I'm like, well, why was that? And so I discovered 18% of women have migraines. I discovered that it's genetic. I discovered that they're extremely debilitating. And then I looked into the medication because I thought I must have given her something that resembles a medication compound. And not at all. Like, she was given painkillers. And I thought, oh gosh, they're targeting the pain. But the pain is just a message. It's just a language to say, I have a problem, but it's not the problem itself. Oh, okay. That's really a bizarre way to fix it. It's a bit like if your daughter jams her finger in the door and you go to the doctor and she says she cries and he gives you earplugs. Then you go back home. She starts to cry more. She's like, obviously you're not listening, mom. And then you go back to the doctor and he gives you a Bose headset and says, oh, there's noise cancellation. We're going to fix that. Then you go back home and then you're like, she's starting to bang on the door. And so I felt, that doesn't make sense. And then I thought 18% of women, oh my God, I must have a lot of friends. Like, I'm a friends person. I'm like, I must have a lot of friends with migraines. And then I went to bed and I recollected these conversations and I thought, oh gosh, I've completely not dismissed them, but because empathy is what you can relate to. They told me, Diane, I go back home, I have a migraine and I heard I have a headache. And I've been such a bad friend because I kind of completely brushed it over. So I called them back and they still had migraines and they were medicated more than ever.
That is just so fascinating. Let's dial it back a little bit for the listener who, I'm sure that there are plenty of listeners who tuned into today's episode because they get migraines and because they have questions about how the migraines relate to their cycles. So maybe share with us, I think the stats on migraines are really interesting. They're really high. Mm-hmm. And they also show a very clear relationship to hormones for a lot of women.
Absolutely.
Where, the onset is typically for a lot of women is coinciding with puberty, which is when we start to make our hormones. And then in terms of cyclically, the migraines are often happening cyclically at certain times of the cycle, before menstruation, during menstruation, maybe around ovulation, but like it's often cyclical for women when they start paying attention. I often find that interesting, just as a side note, because many women have experienced this, but until they actually like note down when it's happening, it's only then that they're like, oh, this is always happening at this time.
Yes.
So share with us, like, what are migraines? What's the difference between a migraine and a headache?
Hey, by the way, I just want to take a moment, Lisa, to just acknowledge your knowledge. Most GPs, professionals around migraines will not completely understand that or completely acknowledge that. Or they'll say, because when you look at a pure scientific paper, it's going to say, oh, it's only a really small fraction of migraines that are purely hormone related. But there's so much more going on in the body. And so it's exactly the way you describe it. So I just want to take a moment to pause and say we have an expert in the room here. Like, thank you for.
But I want to interject because a lot of the knowledge that it's a combination of working with women and seeing what's happening in their cycle, but
listening to them.
Yes.
Listening to them.
But I also read a lot of scientific papers, and it really doesn't take very long before you see that relationship in the scientific papers. So a lot of the papers that I have looked at related to migraines, and maybe it could be what I'm searching, right? Because I'm like searching for that connection, but they acknowledge it. It's right there in black and white that it's connected to puberty, and there's a pretty high percentage of women for whom it is psycho-related who have, like, it's not like you have to search in the research very hard to find these connections.
No, but if you receive a medical education, you receive how many hours on this topic, even if you study neuroscience, limited, very limited. And then who does the education, the continuous education? Well, how the system works is, you get pharmaceutical companies explaining new form of medication, right? And those are pain killers. So the explanations that revolve around this are more around CGRP and mechanisms of pain along the vagus nerve, which are also correct. It's also true. And depending on how you look at the glass, like, is it half full, is it half empty, is this blue or is this green when it's teal? Well, it is also true it's a mechanism of pain and it's genetic. But it's also true it follows a cycle. And so it depends. Unless you go actively, there's I guess two camps. Either you go actively at searching for the information and you find it, or you receive the information and you will receive other things that exist that will only talk about medications, mechanisms of action in order to suppress pain. And then with that, you might also be told, which is true, that there's a massive correlation with depression. And so that when someone has a migraine, another way to solve for it is with depression medication or anti-epileptic drug. And so this is the focus of the knowledge. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that part of my, frustration doesn't quite cut it, but we'll use that one. Part of my frustration is just that, but I guess you also have to acknowledge, like you said, how doctors are trained. It's like anything. The way that our medical system is set up, the way that allopathic medicine is that it's not designed to look for that root cause. It's not root cause medicine. It's a pill for every ill medicine. And so as long as we understand that, it helps us to better understand why things are the way they are and why we're not, because like you said, you were looking at how they were treating it. So you decided to research the medications that they used only to determine that they were treating the pain, but they weren't treating the cause. And you can generalize that to a whole lot of medical type interventions. And I'm out here holding my flag up about the menstrual cycle for all these years because that's exactly how they treat the cycle. Mm-hmm. So share with us, obviously the friends that were coming to you, when you gave the example of, I haven't spoken to you for a while. Like, these are women who are having these serious migraines, can't function for days at a time, sometimes have to take off of work. So tell us the difference between a migraine and headache. How does someone know where that distinction lies?
it depends on the pathway. So for some people, they start with headaches, and then those become more and more intense with life and with time. And for some, they have this super abrupt first migraine when they go to the emergency room. They lost their eyesight, and they were put on morphine immediately, and things got extreme. In both cases, over time, doctors will do this really important role, which is diagnosing the migraines by exclusion. So they're going to say, because your MRI shows nothing, and because your blood test comes back normal, and because there is nothing in your body, therefore, you must have migraines. And then they go a little bit in the family history, and that's how it's diagnosed, which can be very frustrating because it's a very invisible disease. So it's almost just in your head, which is very confrontational and very hard and not really accepted in society, and with lots of stereotypes, which makes it very, very isolating.
Mm-hmm. It's so sad that we're still here, that so many women can experience such crippling and debilitating pain, but that they're simply told that it's in their head.
No, it's super hard. It's super hard. It's true of every family. If you think in your family, I don't know, in my family, I have some team members family members who have migraines. You say, they're napping, they have a migraine. And we're a super kind family, really large and very inclusive. And still, there's kind of a stigma with it. Yeah, and so after that, I called back some of my friends, and then I started to just word of mouth see, hey, can I try to fix this using systems, using rules, if-then statements, like technology to help women know what to take for their migraines. And I thought, I'd find 3 to 4 root causes of migraines, and it would be quickly done. Turns out it was super complicated. There are a myriad types of migraines. Some of it's at ovulation, some of it before menstruation, some of it during menstruation, some of it after menstruation, some of it random, some of it triggered by certain foods, some of them triggered by stress. And so all of these things that little by little, just by talking with women and using the best of Western science, using the best of traditional Chinese medicine, and working with these women hand in hand, and always trusting that whatever they were saying, it would be true, that I started to form that system until I was really able, with really high predictability, help women in a way that would completely transform their lives. And it gave me wings, it gave me just like you must feel just so much gratitude and joy that you find you do something purposeful. How many babies are Fertility Friday babies? It's magical, right? Because these are, this is life, the life force that comes after us. And I think, the energy came from there.
Mm-hmm. Well, share with us then a bit of the connection between migraines and the menstrual cycle and the hormonal piece of it. Obviously, women suffer from migraines disproportionately compared to men.
Yeah.
So let us know what's going on.
Let's go in the core of it. So I would make the statement as far as the following. As long as you have a genetic predisposition for migraines and you have migraines, your cycle and your fertility is not impeccable yet. And it's when you manage to really get that to 0 or down that your fertility massively increases. I even, when I work with women, because they do not come to me to have children, they come to me for migraines. So I always warn them. A few weeks in, they receive this newsletter saying, careful, moving forward, your fertility is going to increase. And some people say, oh, no, don't worry. I never protect myself. There's no danger. I'm like, whoa, we're going to have to change that. You might get pregnant. And if this is not on your life plan, be mindful. And so it's really an alarm system to detect that there's a problem. And when there's no problem, as we both know, the body just, is keen to reproduce and is happy to reproduce. When we have, and you talk a lot in your podcast about tracking, which I love, when you track your menstruation, you can track your migraines in parallel, and then you can learn a few things along the way. There's a number, like you said, there's a number of different migraine patterns that occur at the different time of cycle. So when you go to ovulation, this is really a moment, that women can experience migraine. So they can experience migraine in form of head pain, but they can also come with cramps around the uterus. And so this is the time of ovulation. In traditional Chinese medicine, it's the time of the kidney system. So the kidney system, it's funny, language is structured in a way. In Chinese, when you say shen, which means kidney, it actually does not mean kidney. It means kidney and bladder and adrenals and behind the head and resilience to stress and ovulation and immunity against big diseases. So in traditional Chinese medicine, what decides to go for pregnancy and says we're ready, and what decides to flight or fight or detects a big problem is the same person. It's the same function. It's like, hey, are we at war or can we get a baby? Like what is it? And so it's that system that is going to be depleted. If you have it more around PMS, then it's usually that your liver system is overloaded. Okay, so we talk a lot about hormones in your podcast, and here I'm going to take a slightly different angle to look at the same thing, because everything that is said in your podcast is completely true, and what you said is completely true, is that hormone fluctuation in traditional Chinese medicine at that time is when your liver is loaded with toxins. You're at your highest peak, because your menstruation serves a purpose to empty garbage as well. So the same way in your urine, you have bad stuff, good stuff. In your bowel movement, you have bad stuff, good stuff. In your menstruation, you have bad stuff, good stuff. And so the bad stuff, all of the toxicity from pollution, from cosmetics, from medication, from food, is all charged there, and it's charged and it's ready to go. And when that toxicity is excessive, then you might experience migraines. And those migraines will typically be more in the temple, on the top of the head, across the eyebrows. They're going to be different parts. Your liver system, which in traditional Chinese medicine governs all of your female hormones, is the most linked to the brain. And so in that moment, you might also feel liverish. So you might feel more anger. And so when the menstruation is going to allow for all of that toxicity, all of those toxins to come out, and then the migraines might go. But for some women, migraines are going to stay during the menstruation or kick in during the menstruation. This is yet another kind. When that happens, usually there are a few blood clots stuck in your uterus. And so you need to get those out. Your body is grumpy. It's feeling under threat. If the body has a few blood clots inside the uterus, it feels, if this blood clot grows and if it attaches to the lining of my uterus too long, I don't like this. This makes us vulnerable. Let's get it out. And so the body is going to cramp. It's going to have that menstruation. And so this is where the pill will make no sense, because if you take a continuous pill, you prevent your body from doing that very job they wanted to do. Well, that's going to cause a lot of anxiety, because your body is like, oh my God, we can't get rid of that problem we have. And so it's a fine line to navigate here. And then you can have migraines after your menstruation, which is when you've depleted some of in your menstruation, you have blood, you also have yin, so you have noble liquids. And this is when your noble liquids are really low. And so these are some of the cycles that we experience. However, this is where women will feel confused. It's not always like that, and the pattern is not always impeccable. And so even though you might feel intuitively, my migraines are completely related to my cycle, like Lisa said, but I tracked, like she said, and I put it, and sometimes yes, sometimes no. Why? It's because your body's going to prioritize constantly. And if you've had that edge, and you talk about that in your podcast with Dr. McMill, if you have that, there's a threshold of tolerance or a threshold of toxicity. And if you're at your PMS and you have that extra glass of wine, you're going to tip over. But if you don't, you won't. And so this is where, when you bring your data to a GP, is going to say, well, you say it's related to your cycles. Well, clearly, not really. So you see, it's not that logical. So you need to get up to medication. Do you see what I mean? And this is where women will lose a lot of their self-confidence.
Popping into today's episode with an incredible resource to share. Today's episode is brought to you by my top resource for women's health professionals, How to Interpret Virtually Any Chart Your Client Throws at You. Our new ebook breaks down complex chart interpretation into an easy step-by-step process. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/chart to snag your complimentary copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/chart. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. That's so important and interesting. Obviously, by looking at it through the lens of Chinese medicine. And I think you touch on a really important point, which is that it is always interesting and I think useful to identify those correlations that, if you are charting your cycles and they are often related to the migraines, and you can start to see, okay, I tend to get migraines in this phase of my cycle or that phase of my cycle. And you said something interesting because you said then people will think like, it's because my cycle is causing my migraine, but it's like not your cycle causing the migraines. And I think that that's the key piece of it. There's these issues that are happening in the body and it's manifesting this way at this time for these reasons. And it's it kind of goes back to like the whole concept of the fifth vital sign where yes, like you could see these connections and that's what's alerting you that there's something wrong. But there's a whole lot of women that don't get migraines at this time of their cycle. So it obviously can't be the cycle that's causing your migraines. So like let's dig deeper and find out what is really happening. So I thought that was really, really interesting. The connection obviously to the liver and the different parts of the body that are not functioning normally, the loaded toxicity. And the interesting thing too, I feel like for anyone who's kind of like not convinced, look at what helps, right? Because what helps isn't to stop menstruating.
No. And again, it's going to depend. For some, it may, but for some, it may not. I'll even push the envelope further. I find that sometimes you can have a woman who let's take a woman who has bled a lot. She had really heavy menstruation. And the heavy menstruation can create blood loss to the extent that the migraines are going to kick in because of a blood loss. So it's the brain saying, hey, mayday, we don't have enough blood, we don't have enough oxygen. We're sharing it with the digestive system. So if we've eaten wine, cheese, chocolates, like all of the blood's going to go in the liver and it's going to process the digestion. And the brain says, whoa, I have nothing left. And we take a triptan. The triptan is going to contract the blood vessel and send the blood back. And so we're going to feel, with a bit of intoxicated blood, we're going to feel a little bit normal. And so let's imagine that woman who does this. And so she's going to go on a migraine IUD and indeed, she's going to stop losing blood. And so for a while, she might feel, this was like the solution for me. I'm like, I'm less fatigued. And rightfully so, right? She's less fatigued. She's building her blood reserve again. Like if you just do the maths, I don't know if you've ever done these maths, Lisa, of how many liters of menstruation a woman loses in her lifetime. It's like 23 to 28 liters for the average woman. It's a lot of material. She has to refabricate the material. And so she's going to feel like she can just, reset and refabricate it and feel fine. The problem is over time, she's going to accumulate these toxins. And over time, she's not going to have a menstruation to expel them. So over time, she may start to have migraines that are induced by the migraine IUD because she can no longer expel. She no longer has that door to expel. And so this is where it can be very confusing and very dynamic. So you need to really look at migraines like a fire alarm. When the fire alarm goes on, it's like, okay, let's try to find the smoke in the fire as fast as possible, right? And then once we found it, then we extinguish it. If we let it go for too many years, there's a juxtaposition. So there's lots of different migraines on top of each other and it becomes really hard to read. And so you have to undo the noise to really, again, have these sensations and that strong intuition.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said something interesting as well about this connection to migraines or between migraines and fertility. As you mentioned to some of your clients, okay, when we start working on the migraines and we start improving that, you might notice a change in your fertility. So share with us a little bit about what you found, the connection between migraines and fertility.
Yeah, so as long as so it's a little bit like like the migraine acting like a genetic fire alarm, which, I hope we can change the narrative to it is a tool for longevity. So once the alarm goes off, it means we're ready to go. And so I have these beautiful stories. For example, there was a woman in Mexico and she was saying she was going better, almost like no migraines. And then suddenly she contacts me and she says, Diane, I don't know. I have to go for a test and analysis. Like suddenly I have so many weird things happening in my body and I'm going to have to stop the program. And I was so sad. I thought, oh gosh, she was making so much progress. What's going on? And then she comes back 24 hours later and she says, I'm pregnant. And it was just that. and she wanted to be pregnant. After her, I put in a signal in my system to say, is also looking forward to get pregnant. Because then, I had one recently in Europe and her cycle was delayed. And she's like, oh, it's bizarre, my cycle's delayed. I'm like, you're not just pregnant. It's like, oh, yeah, okay. So it's when the fire alarm goes off, the body is just happy. And so as long as it's on, it means there's still a problem. And so your job is to chase what is the root cause? What is my body trying to say? Trying to speak your body language. Does that answer the question?
It does. It does. I think that, the way that I often look at the menstrual cycle is that as a grown woman of reproductive age, that having a normal cycle, and even I can extend from just looking at the parameters of the cycle to the general experience. Is it normal to have crippling migraines such that you can't get out of bed? No, it's not. So I would say that would be something to consider. What is normal in the menstrual cycle, for example? And when you correct those things, in order to truly correct them without just taking pain medication, which like you should if you're in pain, but obviously that doesn't, that's a temporary solution, right? But when we actually address those underlying root causes and we are able to see lasting improvements and changes, you had to shift something. And once we shift into a more optimal, whether it's hormone balance, whether it's overall function throughout the different body systems, in order to kind of facilitate this shift to healthy cycles, no migraines or far fewer, then it makes complete sense that you would see an improvement in fertility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And you also mentioned something really interesting, which someone who does not suffer from migraines, I have said on the podcast several times that the only time I experienced, because I have experienced migraines before, but the only time that I've really experienced migraines was as a teen when I was on the pill. And I really didn't even make that connection until much, much later. That was the only time that I ever experienced full-on migraines, the aura, the whole thing. But it didn't occur to me what happens during pregnancy. So I think that's an interesting topic that I'd like to hear a little bit more about from you, because you were sharing in our pre-chat some of the challenges where if you are experiencing migraines and obviously having to medicate for them, then what happens when you are pregnant? Are you continuing to take those same medications? Like, how are you managing that?
Okay, so it's a really important point. When women get pregnant, it can happen one of two ways if we make things simple. Either she stops having migraines, and this is going to be the most beautiful time of her life. I meet women who say, I've had migraines for the last 30 years, and my two pregnancies or three pregnancies were the only time where I was like, oh, heaven. So when everyone complains about other symptoms, I'm like, oh, I don't have migraines. So this can be one type of woman. The other type of woman can accentuate and become worse or in different forms and vary throughout trimesters. And at that stage, like you said earlier, when you're in pain, you have to medicate. You just can't medicate chronically, but you have to do what you need to do to function. When you're pregnant, might be an exception. There's, again, if you search for it, you will find it. There's a number of research that points out that even a Tylenol, which, has been for some years, treated as something quite benign to take during pregnancy, would be responsible for more ADHD in children, right? There's a number of classes of medications that have been proven to be, if you look for medications that will damage the liver of the fetus, you'll find all of the acetaminophen, so the Tylenol, all of the NSAIDs, so the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, which are highly used for migraines, such as ibuprofen, and all of the anti-epileptic medication, which are also highly used for migraines. So all of those are going to damage the liver of the fetus. Now, the liver as a system is highly correlated to the brain, and so it's really important to be mindful. If you can't have alcohol when you're pregnant, and if we don't recommend recreational drugs, well, you need to be really mindful of the damage being caused. Now, in saying that, it's like you have to sit with your pain, and it can be, absolutely awful, but it's equally very difficult. We both have children. I believe you have three, to raise like children with needs, right? It's life is full on. So it might be, it's a short-term sacrifice that I would strongly encourage you to do if you can.
You mentioned a couple of situations where, of course, you were able, like many situations, where you were able to support women to overcome their migraines so that they were no longer getting them on a regular basis or at all. And Are there any situations where that has worked or could work for women who are pregnant? So I guess the question is, the solutions that you're supporting women with when they're not pregnant, are any of those solutions available when women are pregnant and are migraine sufferers?
Yeah, actually, there's something that happens when, for example, a woman is pregnant. She needs to go from, let's say, 4-5 liters of blood to about 8. So she does 1.5. You will know those metrics exactly with more exactitude than I would. But so she makes that huge effort. And when that can't happen or can't happen well, she might experience migraines. Now, some of the medication will contract the blood vessels again to irrigate the body faster, but it doesn't replace more blood. And so just, trying to have more blood from food can completely help in that situation. So can be one type of migraine that you can completely help during pregnancy. Yeah. And will help to carry a good pregnancy. Again, the more you're good. That's why, sometimes I meet women who have migraines and they tell me, I'm going to go for IVF. And I'm like, oh, can we wait, please? Can you postpone it by 1 or 2 months? Like, can we make, it's a bit like I tell them, like, let's imagine your earth is like the desert and you're going to take that little tree that you planted in the lab and you're going to put it in your desert. It may grow. Look, it may. It's May, but can we make the earth a bit more fertile before we do? Can we water it? Can we fertilize it? And then chances are much bigger that things will take off. And maybe they'll take off naturally before, because a lot of the migraines are like that, but all other symptoms, help us point in the right direction of what to fix.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, so as we start wrapping up our call today, I mean, for someone who is listening specifically because the word migraine is in the title of today's episode and they've been a sufferer, what, if anything, would you want them to take away from our conversation today?
Well, I would like to flip the finding and say that the more you're going to medicate for migraines, the more you're going to have migraines, and that's a phenomenon which is called rebound migraines or medication overuse headaches, and women will feel that. But I want to push the envelope further today because we're on the Fertility Friday, podcast. Those medication will impact your liver system, which will impact your hormones. And so, if you are in a situation where you need to medicate, very often, and you are in age of fertility, just take a moment of pause, wonder why your body cannot function like this, and what sort of harm, what collateral harm are you doing? And there's something really to be said about taking more medications and impacting your natural hormonal cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's just so interesting to think about. I always strive to find this balance between encouraging. So I would say the parallel in my mind to what I'm more often talking about would be period pain. And so I'm often walking this balance between encouraging women to look deeper and really getting into the root cause so that you can get to the place where either you have far less painful periods, or for some women, they're able to have pain-free periods. But while simultaneously not, discouraging women from using the pain medications when they're still in that phase where they're experiencing the pain, but exactly, like hoping that we can eventually wean them off of them, not because we're trying to make them suffer, but because they're actually getting better.
Absolutely. And look, when I work, I only add foods. That's number one. But I also tell women, look, if you're in pain, you medicate yourself, or you don't change your plan. Your job is you manage your pain. My job is you have no more pain. It's a bit like Lisa's job is to make you fertile. Your job is to manage to be functional along the way. But once Lisa fixed your menstruation, you also solved for that, and you then no longer need that medication. I think chronically medicating, does harm your liver system and therefore your hormonal system.
Mm-hmm. And so interesting, the phenomenon that you mentioned where the kind of consistent over medicating leads to a worsening of the symptoms, which, I mean, that doesn't seem like such a stretch to me, for sure, especially if you're also not addressing because you didn't know or your health practitioners didn't know to do that, to also start addressing the underlying root cause factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, if you put yourself in the shoe of a doctor, which is really hard, is you have this patient in massive pain, and you have a medication that you know is going to give them rebound migraines, do you tell them? It's a question. If your patient is a little girl, you're going to tell the mom, look, I'm going to give you these medications. You have to be careful because the more you're going to medicate her, the more she's going to have migraines. So you have to find the right balance. But if the patient is the person herself, how do you want to navigate that fine line? So usually women will come back and say, I really feel I have to upgrade medication. I feel I'm in more pain. And ultimately the doctor will say, oh yeah, well, there's a rebound migraine effect that I'd like to share with you now that you mention it. But it's hard. It's equally hard for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, Diane, this has been so informative, so important. I'm excited to share this episode with the audience and to really enhance their knowledge and awareness of migraines and the connection to the menstrual cycle and hormone health and through the different body systems as well. So let us know where we can go to find more information about you, what you do. Let us know how we can get in touch.
Mm-hmm. So I have a website called My Nectar Health, nectar like the flower. And so you can get on there. There you can take a test and we can meet and talk about your migraines extensively. And I think I love the conversation where I'm explaining to them, for themselves, the relationship between all of these symptoms they're feeling and their migraines. And then I started to do a podcast called Migraine Heroes, where I'm actually interviewing just women about their life with migraines. And it's incredible, like the level of sufferance, the level of gaslighting, the level of nonsense that many of them go through and the impacts on their personal life. It's been very, very humbling to listen to them. So it's an invitation.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, that is such an amazing resource for women who have suffered migraines, because I can imagine that probably the majority have experienced at least some level of gaslighting. So we'll be sure to link those places in the show notes page for anyone who's on the go. And so I just want to thank you again for being on the show. This was great. It was such a nice opportunity to chat with you.
Yeah. And look, I really want to acknowledge your work and acknowledge how in massive, capable hands women are with you. And, being a mom, like, it's just so important. There's so much more, like a good fertility, a true fertility with a true pregnancy that is all organic and natural and leads to a really, really healthy baby. And in traditional Chinese medicine, people say that the strength of the child is as strong as the strength of the parents at conception. And so when you do things very naturally and you follow your cycle and you listen to your fifth vitality sign, then it leads to a really long-term family happiness. And I just want to really encourage the audience to go in that direction, because it has way more implications that you can only understand after the facts.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for that. Diane, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/507. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, if you are keen to learn more about migraines and how they're related to the menstrual cycle and hormones and some potential solutions, make sure to tune into episode 455. That was my episode with Dr. Meg Mill, and that episode was absolutely fabulous on this topic. Dr. Mill went into a great deal of detail and depth and really helps to explain why there is this connection and why it is that women experience migraines at such a higher rate compared to men. And this topic is also covered in episode 456. That was one of our FAM research series episodes where I went in depth into one of the research studies, a recent research study that's actually looking at this question as well. So lots of great information for you, especially if you are keen to learn more about the topic of migraines. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. And that's a wrap. If you're loving the podcast, then I know you'll love our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. It's a 9-month immersive experience that will completely transform the way you work with clients, allowing you to not only teach fertility awareness to your clients, but to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and diagnostic tool in your women's health practice. Our next class starts on February 27th, so there's still time to reserve your spot. There's no other program like this offered anywhere. Transform your practice in 9 months. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/famlive to apply now. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE.